I'm Andrea, obviously. I'm a PhD student at the MRC Cognition and Brain Sciences Unit at the University of Cambridge. I'm originally from Canada. Maple syrup is in my veins, like any true-blooded Canadian, really. And I'm really, really interested in neuropsychological rehabilitation for many different reasons. When I was 13, I had a concussion. I have epilepsy now, so that it was kind of part of my personal interest just really growing up, but also really what solidified it for me and approaching it from a research perspective was actually volunteering at a rehab hospital back in Toronto, Toronto Rehabilitation Institute. I loved it, and I always say this, and it sounds super corny, but I love the kind of magic of rehab, and I know it's not necessarily magic, but to me, I always differentiate between hospital care and rehab care in the sense that a hospital will decide whether you live or die, if that makes sense. But rehab will help you get your life back. And I really love that concept, that there is work needed to be put in after leaving the hospital, to make sure that you have the quality of life that you deserve. So that was kind of the inspiration that really stuck with me when volunteering at the hospital. So I decided to continue that professionally.
Yeah, and I understand you still volunteer now, is that right? Go to Addenbrooke's and...
Yeah. Yeah, not now. Due to COVID, I'm unfortunately not at the hospital currently. And they're still trying to figure out ways to have like more remote volunteering because Addenbrooke's has had to basically say no to a lot of volunteers at this stage, which is unfortunate. I do miss it quite a bit.
Yeah, and I'm sure that all the people there that you help out miss it too, because it's really important to have that kind of contact and support as people are going through that process.
Yeah, no, I think it can be kind of difficult because I'm sure you would know as well, right? Like every brain injury would be different, right? You hear that all the time from people. And sometimes, especially in hospital, it can feel quite draining and quite boring. So I think that even just kind of having a conversation about all that can really be helpful. And, at least from my personal interest, I just like it because, a lot of what I do in research is, kind of very procedural, very like, obviously outcome focused, and I'm kind of working on tasks. But Addenbrooke's, and the reason I continued it was just because it is genuinely enjoyable to kind of just sit there and have a conversation with someone. It doesn't have to be complicated, just, a chat over a tea.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually, do you think that those experiences inform your research as well? Not that you're using those people as participants in the study or anything, but just that it reminds you about what this thing you're studying is really about. It's about those people, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a huge part of it, to be honest, because I think that, I'm not a trained clinician. I'm interested in pursuing that in the future, but I also think that, to be honest, a lot of the experience of brain injury is kind of approaching people not professionally, if that makes sense, kind of these casual chats that you do get to have as a volunteer. Because if I go in as a clinician, my job is to, maybe an assessment, to communicate news as a very specific purpose, but I really value those informal conversations quite a bit. That you just get more opportunities for those as a volunteer.
Yeah, I think you get more time, but also from the patient's perspective, they're not dealing with a doctor, and they'll behave differently, won't they, in those different kind of contexts?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's just a different kind of relationship, right? That I think is really good to have.
Yeah, we know that there are some parts of the UK where people don't get the kinds of neuropsych rehabilitation that they perhaps need. I kind of wonder if you've got any thoughts on that, and do people get what they really deserve and what they need, or do people fall through the gaps? Can you identify anything that's missing, really?
Oh, no, I think people definitely fall through the gaps, unfortunately. That's kind of one of the most consistent things I hear, especially like on the community-based side of things, because that's the interesting, my research is on community-based rehab, really. And in contrast to volunteering in hospital, like in hospital, of course, you have kind of everyone at the ready, right? If there's an issue, someone will come by and support you as best as you need. So there's a lot of really great care at that end. But it's in the community side that, because we know every pathway will be super different in brain injury, a lot of people only realize much later on that, oh my gosh, I need more help, I need more support, but there's huge waiting lists, depending on what kind of support they need, like mental health support, for example. A lot of them are classified as like neurological populations, so they're not necessarily being assessed by community mental health teams. So there's a lot of different factors at work here that there's probably not enough at the outset. At least not everybody will get enough at the outset. And B, in the long term, there's not enough support you know, from maybe more community-based services that don't have as much experience dealing with neurological populations. So I think, you know, half of it would need to be education and the other half would need to be access. And then there's tons of other, you know, contextualizing factors, you know, like socioeconomic status. You know, some people can afford private care, some people can't, some people get insurance policies to help support that. But there's a lot of, I could talk about this for ages if you let me.
No, I know. And that's not even mentioning all the people who are unrecognised with a mild brain injury who maybe didn't even go to hospital.
Yeah, no, exactly, right? I mean, and that's one of the biggest concerns, right? That a lot of people will just, you know, kind of be like, oh, I can walk it off. I didn't lose consciousness. I'm just a little dizzy. But it's that critical time period, right? That's so essential that you do need to be assessed, and you do need to be made sure that there isn't anything happening. I remember one person I spoke to had a brain bleed that wasn't identified for 15 months after a concussion. And it's just like, this is the kind of thing that we could prevent and deal with, you know?
Yeah, and the long-term consequences of injuries like that are just incalculable, really. And we know there's lots of research about the costs. Everything comes down to money, doesn't it? At the end of the day, we know spend the money early on and you save it in the long run.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Yeah, like, I mean, it's one of the main points I like to hit home. It's like rehab sounds expensive, you know, but it pays itself off in about 2 years. 2 years is nothing in the grand scheme of life. You know, it's completely worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. Yeah. Well, Andrea, the reason I'm talking to you, of course, is that you won the UKABIF Film Award this year. So we should probably talk a bit about your film. Can you sort of describe what your film was about for the people that haven't seen it? And I'm sure we'll put a link into this video and people can watch it straight after.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was really excited to win it in general. I was just like, oh, you know, it's one of those things that it seemed like a great thing to do. I'm just like, oh, this is nice. And obviously I've been involved in brain injury work in quite a bit. So I was really motivated to try and put something together that was a visual representation kind of rehab and what it meant and how important it is. And what really struck me when I was thinking about developing this video was this concept of just metaphors and how people, you know, use metaphors to describe their brain injury, because it's quite hard, I think, if you haven't had one, to really understand what it means, you know, and how it affects you and, you know, how individual it can be. And that's kind of why I started with 3 metaphors, really. One was the woman with the filing cabinet. I remember very clearly a person telling me, my brain injury is like a filing cabinet with all the files flying everywhere, and I'm just trying to get them sorted again. And that's quite a powerful visual, I think.
Yeah.
I remember another person telling me, you know, my brain is like a beautiful record player, and the stroke, you know, just caused this little tiny chip on this record, and now it doesn't play music anymore. And I remember that, again, quite distinctly. These are just powerful images that have stuck with me over the years. And the third woman is the broken vase. And the reason, I mean, that's a little bit maybe more obvious, but that's kind of my, and I'll come to it later in describing the film, but my kind of favorite idea of rehab, it comes from the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is this idea that broken like ceramics, effectively broken anything, just because it has been broken doesn't mean it's useless or damaged. And they honor that piece of ceramics that have been broken by resealing it with gold paint so that you highlight those cracks. So you're honoring, that change, that brokenness in some way, but you can still be useful and put together. So at the end of the film, the woman, it's kind of hard to notice on the film, but it is like, the vase is put back together with a little bit of gold cracks. So it's meant to be that, that just because something has been damaged doesn't mean it's useless.
Yeah, that's really interesting as well in terms of rehabilitation not being about getting back to how you were before. So we're not creating exactly the same vase. We're going to tell that it's broken and it's changed. It's different.
Exactly.
That's what life is like for people after brain injuries. They get back to a new identity.
Exactly. And I think that was really important. And I tried to carry that idea with the metaphors of the other two people. The filing cabinet, like the categories have changed a little bit. The record player, there is still kind of a little bit of that zigzag in the music notes, so that it's not necessarily the same, but it's still good, it's still useful, it's still powerful, and it's essential. And that's what I was trying to represent visually, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And so did you do all the drawings yourself? For those that haven't seen it, it's a kind of animated, isn't it? Line drawing.
Yeah, no, I have a whiteboard that I have at home. Actually, I have it right here, right by my desk. I still have this. It's just sitting by me. Everyone deserves a right to rehab. Just because I like drawing, and it was one of those things that I knew that I wouldn't be able to figure out how to do anything animated on the computer. I'm like, that would take way too much time, so I'd rather just hand draw it. And that was fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and in entries for the Film Award over the last few years, we've seen a whole range of things. There's one with Lego bricks put together, and people have shot bits of film. And I seem to remember a previous winner built a picture of a brain with some stones on the beach.
Oh wow!
Sort of saw that coming together. So it's great to see those different approaches.
Yeah.
Used. So why did you enter the award? How did you hear about it?
I saw it on Twitter. And it was one of those things that I've never submitted to a video competition before, or any kind of, I mean, I've done outreach work in more, I guess, a traditional sense, like presentations, the I'm a Scientist program, that kind of stuff, but I've never done, I guess, something more arts focused. And, a little bit of background about me, I almost went to school for illustration rather than psychology. So this is like my second passion, and I saw, I'm like, this sounds like a really, really great opportunity to just kind of have an artistic project that's also meaningful to me. And I remember watching last year's winner before as well. Or I think it wasn't last year, maybe it was in February, the award winner. But I remember watching that, being like, this is actually a really nice idea to kind of just promote awareness about brain injury in general, because this is, like, again, one of the number one things I hear from people I work with, that a lot of people don't understand brain injury. Half their difficulty is explaining their brain injury and, talking with people who don't really get it. So I think it is important to have channels like this where you can kind of at least give an idea of what brain injury is like.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time talking about mine, and the most common response afterwards is people saying, thanks for getting it, even though yours isn't the same as mine. There's similarity and somebody understands. I think it's really important. And that's something that we've tried to show quite a lot through the Film Award over the years, is different representations kind of coming through, and some from patients themselves, some from researchers, some from clinicians. Yeah. And really just shining a light on this kind of hidden disability. Exactly,
right? Because I remember, that's the thing, this whole concept of quotes and metaphors, it's those things that stick with you, right? The things that people say, the phrases they use, the language they use, that's the kind of stuff that sticks with people. And I think that's really important to communicate to others who may not have brain injury or who have different types of brain injury. That's quite powerful. I remember one person I worked with says, like, the easiest injury to hide is a brain injury, because people will look at you and assume that everything's normal, you can behave as normal, but they just don't get it, and because there's so many campaigns, right, about highlighting the fact that it is a hidden disability, because it is, I think it's quite hard to appreciate if it's not obvious.
Yeah, definitely, or to mistake it for something else, somebody's drunk. Or
yeah,
really difficult. So I'm interested in the kind of metaphors. So you've explained how you kind of heard some of those examples that you use in the film. Is it something that you use when you're volunteering to help people kind of make sense of where they're at? Do you have kind of favourite metaphors, other ones perhaps that you'd pull out?
Yeah, no, I mean, those are the ones that really stuck with me. I mean, I think that, there are a lot of different metaphors that I have heard. I mean, for the purposes of the film, I stuck with kind of the ones that I thought were the most powerful. But I mean, other metaphors I have heard, it's like kind of like being lost in a forest. Like you're kind of just, you don't have direction, you can't really understand, where you need to go next or what needs to happen next. All you see are these, like, imposing trees around you. So I think that's also quite a useful metaphor to have, right? You just don't have a sense of direction after your brain injury. Other ones I've heard, it's like a broken mirror, like, it's you, but there's something wrong with you. But again, I think I could probably make an entire film just about metaphors, more than a few minutes, because there are quite interesting ones. In terms of working with participants, I think it's useful to communicate these metaphors that other people have used, but I also think it's quite important for people to develop their own metaphors, and what works for them and how they understand themselves. I think that's going to be the most useful thing, and that's quite a long process, I think.
Yeah, there's a nice one that really struck with me about recovery. Which was, think about roadworks. So, the road is blocked because they're digging up. It's a nightmare. And OK, so they're going to build a new road. And while they build that new road, the traffic is going to be horrendous. Everybody's going to take much longer to get to where they're going. But if we keep using the new road, we strengthen that pathway, it becomes faster. And it's a different way we're going now, but we can still get there. Yeah. It kind of stuck with me, and again, sort of reinforced the idea that we're not the same.
Yeah, no.
We function and we do things and we find new ways to work. I think that's quite powerful.
Yeah, no, and that's a really great one too. I think, and it comes back to this idea, exactly like you were saying, that because we're all different, we're all individuals in any capacity, like, it is really important to find that one that sticks with you.
Yeah. Well, I hope that people will watch your film and some of the other ones as well, and perhaps get some ideas from that will help them form those kind of ways of understanding the position that they're in, and the ways that you can help other people, of course, because we have this huge population of people recovering from acquired brain injury or one or another. But we also have an even bigger population of their carers and families that are kind of help find a way through this mess and out the other side.
Yeah, no, and I think there is a lot of research interested in that as well, right? You know, like family members, carers, siblings. I think there should be more of that, you know, to be honest, because I think that not even necessarily about how the caregiver responds to the person with the brain injury, but just kind of the carer or the family member on their own. Because I think that it's quite easy to kind of become the carer, and that's your sole purpose and identity after a brain injury, because it is quite hard. It is a big change for a lot of people involved, right? So I think that, you know, there is, you know, some really great research coming out there about like, all right, you know, like how does a carer make time for themselves so that they can better, you know, support someone as they need it for a brain injury. And I go back and forth on this quite a bit. I think about this a lot because ultimately rehab, a big part of it is that independence, right? So that when they're more independent, the carer, the family member doesn't necessarily have to put in so much time. But because the person with the brain injury is going through so much, they genuinely want the people close to them to understand and be part of every step. So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, and also, of course, the carer builds this new identity as the carer, but they need to let go sometimes and let people make mistakes. You can't learn to ride a bike without falling off. And it hurts. As a parent, I've seen all my children fall off their bikes, and it's horrible, right? But that's what has to happen. It's really, really very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
So your research really is focused on kind of community-based rehab, which I guess touches on some of those things that we've talked about, and different kinds of players in that scenario, whether it be families or carers or clinics and clinicians. So are there kind of weaknesses that you can identify in community rehab? Are there areas which we do really well?
So that's a good question, I think. I mean, my immediate response was like, oh no, rehab is great. We just need more of it. I mean, that's really probably issue number one, to be honest, that it shouldn't be something that's special or you only get if it's equally justified. I think it should be mandatory. It should be, you know, available to everybody, especially community-based. I think that in terms of what we do really, really well, I think that a lot of rehab programs, at least the ones, the teams that I've interacted with, have been really good at being, multidisciplinary, just really kind of involving all angles, working together as a team, understanding the person as a whole rather than an issue, like you are just this physical part of your brain injury rather than, you as a person trying to live in your social world. I really love that kind of concept that, in the long term, we're trying to help people with the brain injury feel part of society, have, really be confident in getting what they want out of their life. And that's quite a challenging topic. So I think that, rehab, at its essence, tries to tackle that really well. I think that's really good. I think that when we speak about access to rehab, other than purely like, postcode lottery location-based stuff, I kind of wish there was more options for top-up, rather than just kind of one course of rehab. People are available to kind of go multiple times if they feel they need it, as appropriate, and you can scale it depending on the person. Because I think that's also quite a common concern in the long term, that people benefit really, really a lot in the first few years following rehab, but then maybe something changes in their life, maybe they're still trying to cope, or maybe they just want to come back and learn more. There's a subset of people that would benefit probably from additional input, or continued input, right? Kind of like ongoing job training, if you will, right? It's always good to refresh those skills every once in a while.
Yeah, interesting. We always have some kind of CPD program, which you sort of touch base and irrelevant. But for a lot of people, you get 12 weeks and see you later. So.
Yeah, and I understand, like you said, it all comes down to money, right? I mean, in an ideal world, it should be a little bit like education, right? You can just kind of go for a course, when you feel like you need it, or a SEALs training CPD program, if you will. I think that would be really useful. I also think that if I go back and forth, because I have this conversation with my supervisor a lot, the best form of community rehab, because like there's a lot of like milieu-based approaches where it's just like you're here in this community-based program for 12 weeks. This is all you're doing, like 4 or 5 days a week. And then there's other versions of it where it's like once a week for, let's say, 3 months, let's say. And I don't know what the best approach can be, and it probably is highly dependent on the person, because in one frame of mind, it's just like probably that really intensive approach is really like it creates a strong kind of memory of like, all right, this is a formative experience for me. This is how I'm going to, take this information going forward in my life. But then that kind of more subtle approach maybe also works better for people who can't afford, such a, an intensive approach, or who want to kind of balance it with, I'm returning to work and I just need a little bit of help and monitoring in the meantime. So I think about that a lot. What is the best format that we should be prescribing? Who should prescribe it is a bigger question.
Yeah, and again, I guess it comes back to the thing that everybody's different. We can't just design one pathway and put everybody through.
Yeah, exactly.
The same way. Something that UKABIF has been campaigning for quite a long time is the rehab prescription, so that when you leave the trauma unit, you have a piece of paper which says, "Look, this is what I should have." Just like you go to the chemist to pick up your pills, you can check, and this is what you should have. And we're starting to see some progress there. More of them are being given out, but there's still a lot of work to be done, I think, there, just to make sure that people get what they're entitled to and they understand what they're entitled to.
Definitely. No, I mean, and I think this is another thing that, I know UKABIF touches on quite a bit as well, just the policy side of things, how do we build this into UK policy, global policy about the right to rehab? How do we make sure that it's, being effectively translated down to the people on the ground, right? That this is something you have to have effectively, and this is something that, we should always allocate money for, because, I mean, in Cambridgeshire, at least, I mean, there have been severe cuts to community-based rehab programs, unfortunately, and it literally affects thousands of people in the area. And it's unfortunate because the ones who can't afford private care are the ones that are going to suffer and have these long-term consequences. So how do we protect that money? How is it? I mean, that's the thing. If it comes down to life or death versus quality of life, people probably pick life or death. But what is the point of being alive if you're suffering all the time? You don't have that quality of life you deserve. It comes down to that.
There's some really difficult issues there, isn't there, that we probably don't have time to go into now. But yeah, we're much better at saving lives now than we were before. Are we much better at giving people improved quality of life? We're getting there, but I think there's a long way to go.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. It's always about. I mean, again, I could talk about this for ages if you let me, because it's so great what happens in acute care that we are giving people the option to live, but I think it's like you said, the option to live well is a much harder thing to tackle and does take time and effort and money.
Yeah, of course. We were hearing at the UKABIF AGM just the other day that the number of people with cognitive problems after COVID is starting to become apparent now. So there could be huge numbers of people requiring rehabilitation over the next 5, 10, 15 years because of this pandemic.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see whether money continues to follow those people, or once the crisis is over, touch wood, in another year, 18 months' time, it'll all suddenly just go back to normal again.
And I hope not. No, I mean, what I'm hoping for is that because of the numbers affected by COVID and, the news coverage around it, it just becomes, the issue of rehab just becomes a much more visible kind of issue that suddenly we have a huge number of people that are being followed by, media and the news, that are living with these neurological consequences. So how do we support them? And then that opens up the wider conversation about what are the benefits of rehab and who does it benefit? How is it currently structured? So I'm excited for the opportunity for there to be a conversation about rehab, because still, even for me in my field, in my department, sometimes when I say rehabilitation, this is the research I do, they're like, oh, you mean drug rehab or alcohol rehab? I'm like, no, there's different types, and this conversation needs to happen. So I'm excited for that aspect, that it's going to make a little bit more global news in a way.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Obviously, the change in intensive care was so quick.
Yeah.
And, thousands of ventilators being built in people's sheds almost. That happened enormously quickly. It'd be just really sad if we don't see a similar drive for improvement in rehabilitation services too. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
Good one. Well, Andrew, it's been fantastic chatting to you. We could talk all day, I'm sure. Is there, just as a last thing, I wonder if there's something you could say to encourage other people to enter a film for the Film Award next year? What would you say to get people moving?
And I mean, I guess like my number one piece of advice is find something that's meaningful to you. I mean, maybe that's a little bit of a cop-out thing to say, but I think that everybody does have their own perspective on brain injury. You know, everybody does have their own meaning that they interpret from it. So try and use that meaning, right, in a way that you find interesting and just have fun with it. I think that to me, I had a lot of fun. And that's what I really enjoyed about it, to be honest, that it was something meaningful, but also fun. And I think that that would be kind of the two things I would say, you know?
Brilliant. Excellent. That was my dementia-ridden cat squealing in the background, listeners, but don't worry about that. Excellent. Thank you ever so much for your time, Andrea. I really appreciate it. We enjoyed your film. And as I say, we'll put a link to that so anybody who watches this film can go see that one too. Excellent. Thank you ever so much. Bye-bye.
Cheers.